Ghosting originally emerged as a term describing the sudden, unexplained ending of communication in romantic relationships. It's something that, at its core, reflects a kind of avoidance of confrontation, discomfort, or rejection. And while we might think of it exclusively as a dating behavior, it's evolved into something much broader, a kind of socio-cultural marker for our times. When dating apps entered the scene, the entire landscape of relationships changed. Apps like Tinder and Bumble introduced what some call swipe culture, a system where suddenly everyone was navigating what felt like endless potential matches. This abundance of choice ironically made relationships more disposable. The ability to swipe for the next possible partner made ghosting not just easier but almost normalized. Why have a tough conversation when you can quite literally disappear with just a tap? Critics in the early days of ghosting often labeled it as immature or selfish. And yes, those critiques do hold weight, especially when you consider how it's often about avoiding accountability. But what's fascinating is how ghosting became more than just a behavior. It turned into a symbol of modern disconnection. In a world where we're more connected than ever, why does stepping away feel so tempting, even inevitable? For Gen Z in particular, ghosting isn't just about dating anymore. It mirrors broader shifts in how relationships, intimacy, and emotional labor are navigated in our hyper-connected world. And it's these shifts that start to paint a picture of how ghosting transitioned from a niche dating phenomenon to a kind of cultural shorthand for disconnection. And while its roots may lie in something as personal as one-on-one interactions, we'll see how ghosting has spilled over into completely new territories. From friendships to professional spaces, even family relationships, its reach has extended far beyond its origins. The pandemic brought with it seismic shifts in how we interact, both physically and digitally. It dissolved many of the boundaries we used to rely on, and for Gen Z, who were already navigating the complexities of hyperconnectivity, it made ghosting an even more pervasive part of their daily lives. Suddenly, ghosting became not just about dating, but a response to friendships, to jobs, to even family relationships. One of the clearest examples of this expansion lies in what people call situationships. The Wall Street Journal noted how this vague, undefined form of romantic connection surged during the pandemic. With so much uncertainty, the emotional clarity that many sought became hard to find. In that environment, ghosting wasn't always a selfish act. It started to serve as a kind of psychological escape, a coping mechanism for individuals overwhelmed by the constant emotional ambiguity of the time. And honestly, I think what's striking here is how much of this became normalized. Jobs, for instance. Employers reported seeing a sharp rise in candidates ghosting after interviews or even after accepting offers. The 2023 Indeed study showed that 28% of Gen Z job seekers admitted to ghosting employers. But the reciprocity of it is important. Companies, too, began ghosting applicants at higher rates during those same years. It's like the very fabric of professionalism was put under strain, and ghosting became this almost silent form of communication, or non-communication. But why did this happen specifically during the pandemic? The blurring of digital and physical realms plays a huge role. Social contact moved almost entirely to platforms like Zoom, and relationships, not just romantic ones, were forced to exist in a digital space. This intense reliance on digital communication made it easier and perhaps less guilt-inducing to just disappear, to, log off or not reply. A 2020 CDC report revealed that nearly 75% of young adults experienced multiple adverse mental health symptoms during the pandemic. That's a staggering number, and it points to why ghosting might not just be about disconnection, but about kind of self-preservation. What's clear is that ghosting wasn't just a one-off behavior anymore. It became an embedded practice. It's almost like an unintended result of the pandemic-era lifestyle, where the lines between engagement and withdrawal grew thinner and thinner. There's a term, Snapchat dysmorphia, that captures the way our self-image becomes distorted by technology. It refers to the influence of filters, curated photos, and idealized digital selves that shape how we see ourselves and how we present to others. In a world where so much of our identity is constructed through screens, it's no surprise that our sense of connection feels equally fragmented. As we step deeper into this digital reality, the way we show up, or choose not to, reveals just how much perception and presence have begun to blur. Let's think about presence for a moment. Platforms like Instagram or Snapchat leave us with traces, read receipts, online activity indicators, these constant reminders of whether someone has acknowledged you or not. This is what makes ghosting so jarringly visible. The pain comes not just from someone fading away, but from knowing they saw you, they chose not to respond. Technology amplifies that limbo, and it's excruciatingly precise in highlighting absence. It's no longer just a feeling, it's quantified by the lack of a double tap or the absence of a reply. And the impact of this precision isn't just personal. Take workspaces as an example. That same 2023 Indeed study we mentioned earlier found something striking. 28% of Gen Z job seekers admitted to ghosting employers. Just not showing up for interviews, ignoring emails, choosing not to engage, but employers, they're doing the same thing, ghosting applicants after interviews, withdrawing offers without notice. It's a cycle, a feedback loop, where withdrawal becomes normalized on both sides. And in professional environments, this lack of accountability further strains communication. But it's not just about what technology lets us do, it's how it makes us feel. Digital spaces distort relationships. Zoom dysmorphia, for example, highlights how people became hyper-aware of their own reflections during hours of video calls. Instead of connecting with others, you're caught in this loop of self-perception. It's disorienting, maybe even dehumanizing. And when our perception of ourselves and others feels warped, it's almost inevitable that disconnection follows. Like, if I don't trust what I see, is it easier just to fade away? These phenomena point to a deeper cultural disorientation. Ghosting, as much as it frustrates or hurts, seems to thrive in fragmented spaces, fragmented expectations, fragmented attention, fragmented realities. And the question becomes, where do we go from here? Ghosting as we know it has moved far beyond its original context. It's no longer just about dating or avoiding awkward goodbyes. It's now intertwined with how we manage emotional boundaries and self-care. Today, leaving an event without saying goodbye, what some call the Irish goodbye, is not just common, it's praised. It reflects this broader shift toward prioritizing emotional well-being over social norms. Big Boss Veta captured this shift in a tweet when she said, "Please respect my ghosting stage. I be going through stuff can't nobody help me with." These words resonate with so many because, honestly, they reflect a reality we don't often discuss, that sometimes disappearing feels necessary. It's not always about rejecting others, it's about self-preservation, especially in a world where constant emotional availability feels exhausting. But let's not romanticize it entirely. There's a paradox here, one worth exploring. On the one hand, ghosting in these social contexts can feel liberating. It's an act of reclaiming agency and setting clear boundaries, especially when traditional norms feel suffocating or outdated. On the other hand, it has the potential to isolate us further. By withdrawing without explanation, are we leaning too heavily on detachment as a solution to emotional strain? When we frame ghosting as self-care, we begin to challenge old ideas of etiquette and accountability. Is it outdated to expect formalities like farewells? Or are we losing something valuable in these disappearing acts? That's the tension we're sitting with, between these acts as empowering and these acts as potentially alienating. And this makes me think, are these choices always deliberate, or are they shaped by the tools and spaces we interact in? When even public life begins to embrace practices of withdrawal, it suggests something deeper about how our environments influence our behaviors. Let's start by looking at the tools we use every day. Social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. These platforms, which are designed to connect us, have these subtle features that ironically make disappearing almost inevitable. Look at read receipts, for example. They were meant to create transparency, but instead they amplify the ambiguity of ghosting. You send a message, you see it's been read, and then silence. That little seen marker. It becomes this symbol of absence, of being deliberately ignored. And of course, we can't ignore how online status indicators play into this. Even knowing when someone is active, how many times have we checked, only to wonder why they're so clearly online but not replying? This creates a kind of agonizing limbo. You can't help but notice, because technology leaves breadcrumbs with timestamps, notifications. It's constantly showing you everything except what you really want to know. And that's not by accident. Platforms thrive on engagement, even if it's the emotional frustration of waiting for a reply. But here's where it gets fascinating. Gen Z hasn't just accepted this as a passive reality. They've found ways to push back against it, to manipulate these design choices to exert control. Think about ghost accounts or curated visibility. People create alternate accounts, only sharing their unfiltered content with close friends. Or turn off read receipts altogether just to escape these unspoken expectations. It's these small moves that show an awareness, an attempt to manage how digital systems shape emotional interactions. At the same time, though, the question remains, are these behaviors giving people control, or are they just deepening the sense of detachment? Because when you're selectively visible or hiding part of yourself online, are you really engaging authentically, or are you moving further into this fragmented identity that digital life tends to promote? The 2024 Pew Research report highlighted the role of social platforms in shaping emotional norms, particularly for Gen Z. It's not just about the features, but how they push us into these cycles of digital connection and withdrawal. And when you pair that with constant exposure to idealized online selves, it's like this paradox. Technology makes it easy to connect, but it also tempts and enables us to disengage just as easily. So where does this leave us? When the very tools meant to bring us closer quietly encourage us to withdraw, it feels almost inevitable that ghosting becomes the norm. And while it may feel like a way to escape or protect ourselves in the moment, when we think about ghosting, we often treat it like a one-size-fits-all phenomenon, but it's not. Who ghosts, why they ghost, and what it means all depend heavily on the social and cultural context. Take gender, for instance. Research shows that women are more likely to ghost, but not for the reasons we might think at first glance. For many women, ghosting isn't about being dismissive, it's about safety. Avoiding potentially uncomfortable or dangerous confrontations becomes a kind of self-protection. And this isn't just limited to gender. Race and cultural norms also play significant roles in shaping ghosting behaviors. In some communities, direct confrontation might be seen as aggressive or disrespectful, so stepping away silently can be interpreted as the more socially acceptable route. It's fascinating to realize that what looks like avoidance on the surface can actually be deeply tied to navigating power dynamics and cultural expectations. But let's not overlook how ghosting reflects broader inequalities. When someone disappears without explanation in professional spaces, for example, it's easy to frame it as unprofessional. But let's ask, what if that was their only way to assert agency in an unequal system? Especially in fields where marginalized groups face systemic bias, ghosting can become a form of silent protest, a way of reclaiming power in a space that inherently disadvantages you. Still, These circumstances don't make ghosting any less controversial. There's a fine ethical line here. Is ghosting always justified? Maybe not. But if you think about it, the idea that everyone deserves an explanation rests on the assumption that emotional labor is distributed equally, and it's not. For those already stretched thin, particularly those struggling with mental health or navigating forms of systemic oppression, ghosting can feel like the only viable option. It's not cruelty, it's capacity. And that raises an interesting question. Are we, as a society, placing unfair expectations on some while excusing others? Who gets judged for ghosting? Who gets forgiven? And what does this say about who holds power in communication? It's a form of silent negotiation, one that reflects how the rules of engagement are often anything but equal. Of course, even as we frame ghosting through these lenses of agency and inequality, understanding ghosting as a behavioral response requires us to look deeper, not just at the act itself, but at the emotional climate in which it occurs. And for Gen Z, this climate is shaped by unprecedented levels of connection. Think about it. We're navigating a world where notifications never seem to stop, where there's this constant pressure to be available, to respond, to engage. It's exhausting. And exhaustion isn't just a side effect, it's a driving force. The 2020 CDC report revealed that 75% of young adults aged 18 to 24 reported multiple adverse mental health symptoms during the pandemic. Those numbers are staggering, but they also reveal why ghosting isn't always as simple or as cruel as it's sometimes portrayed. It's often about capacity or the lack of it. When connection feels like just another demand, disengaging can feel like the only escape. Psychological overload, well, it's something we don't talk about enough. This idea that constantly being available, digitally, emotionally, socially, takes a real toll on our mental health. Imagine juggling deadlines, group texts, family dynamics, and on top of all that, this endless stream of social media content. For many, especially Gen Z, ghosting becomes a way to set boundaries when everything else feels overwhelming. And it's important to note that ghosting is rarely about malicious intent. Sure, it can feel abrupt, hurtful even, but in so many cases it's not born out of cruelty. It comes from a place of emotional fatigue, like someone's already stretched to their limit, carrying the weight of whatever anxiety or mental strain they're dealing with. Responding can feel, impossible. Ghosting then isn't rejection, it's self-preservation. Digital relationships, though, they complicate things even further. Virtual spaces don't just connect us, they amplify everything. They magnify interaction to a point where even basic social engagement feels higher stakes. And, well, when every single moment is scrutinized under the bright light of group chats or read receipts, it makes sense that people retreat. It's not ideal, sure, but it's also understandable, right? The more we think about it, the more it becomes clear that ghosting operates as a kind of coping mechanism in a world where availability feels both constant and unsustainable. When we talk about moving beyond ghosting, it's really about reimagining how we navigate disconnection, how we handle those moments when we need to exit a relationship, a conversation, or even just a situation. And honestly, so much of it comes down to intention. What would it look like if we approach these exits with more care, with more attention to the impact we leave behind? One idea gaining traction is the concept of the graceful exit. It's not about making a grand gesture or over-explaining yourself. It's about a simple, honest acknowledgement, something that says, I need to step away, but I respect you enough to tell you that. And while this might not fit every situation, let's be real, some dynamics don't warrant that level of effort. It could shift cultural norms in a meaningful way. Think about how much we grapple with digital ambiguity, those unanswered texts, the disappearing acts. They create these lingering questions, right? But what if we shifted toward practices that made disconnection less painful, less loaded? Maybe it's as simple as normalizing messages like, "Hey, I can't continue this conversation, but thank you for your time," or "I need to step back from this interaction for now." That honesty, even in its brevity, has the potential to feel grounding. And this kind of mindset might start with younger generations, particularly Gen Z. They've lived so much of their lives in these digital spaces that they also have the potential to rewrite the rules. We're already seeing hints of this in conversations around emotional clarity and the push for intentional communication. It's not just about avoiding conflict, it's about, thinking ahead, considering how your choices influence the people around you, even if you're stepping away. But let's not kid ourselves. Changing these norms won't be easy. Ghosting feels effortless, and introduced into a world of constant connectivity, it's often the fastest way to disengage. Yet the question we really need to ask is whether it's sustainable. If the default becomes disappearing, what does that mean for how we understand accountability and, more broadly, connection? Cultural shifts like this tend to start small. A shared tweet, a viral TikTok, even just casual norms within friend groups can shape perceptions around ghosting and graceful exits. And over time, that could expand into something larger, a collective understanding that maybe the way we disengage is just as important as how we show up. It challenges us to be both present and absent with intention. So as we reflect on all of this, I think the real takeaway is that redefining presence, what it means to truly be there for someone, might just be the key to moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, finding grace in exits will help us reclaim authenticity in this hyper-connected, often overwhelming world. And on that note, that's all for today. It's been a fascinating journey unpacking ghosting, its implications, and the opportunities it presents for a more thoughtful future. Thanks for listening. Take care, and I'll see you next time.